first thing I'm going to do is say hello, and then the second thing I'm going to do is ask you to move forward and in, because this is theater, so we need to be close, we need to sit next to one another, and I need to be able to see you. Here we go! 5, 4, 3, 2... I'm still on 2. You could come in even closer. Great. I promise I won't make you turn next to the person next to you and ask them about their childhood. Hi, thank you, Tyler. And it's a real honor to be invited to be here at the Friday Forum. If you live in town and have done that for a long period of time, this is kind of a real place. This is a community place where it's an honor to be invited. Lots of people have been up here. So I'm going to talk, and I'm going to start by saying that I have a friend who, if some time has passed between the last time we saw one another and spoke and now, this friend always says to me, "Let's see, what do I want to tell you? What do I want to tell you?" I love that. I love that care and intention. That understanding that our time together now is important and singular, that our time together in language is not trivial, and that our time together in this particular moment in language and is in language, telling. So that's how I feel at this moment. I feel like what I want to say to you now in this particular moment is, let's see, what do I want to tell you? What is it in this moment, that this now, that is important and singular? What do I want to tell? I want to tell by reiterating the description of this talk, not just because that's what I said I would talk about, but also because I think it's useful to frame what we're going to talk about. And then I want to think together with you about a question that I ask. And after that, I want to offer some insight into where I come from and the things I think about. And I want to pose that there's a relationship between those two. And then I want to look at some work together with you live. There's a little bit of feedback that's happening. Okay, here we go. Yeah. So can you still hear me? Okay, good. So the description of this Friday Forum talk, this telling, the name of it is called The Artist as Artist and Insistence. That's also a reference to Gertrude Stein, who insisted that repetition is insisting. The socially contributive role of the artist is to interrogate our current operating social paradigms in order to raise radically effective questions. In other words, to make trouble. To make such wonderful trouble in such novel ways that any movement towards a solution requires rethinking our larger social structures and our relation to those social structures. In order for answers to arise in relation to these newly raised and so desperately needed wicked questions, a fundamental shift must occur, a seeing anew. These radically effective questions are the groundbreaking work of the artist. These are the traces of the artist as artist, insisting. As a society, as a community, as individuals, what are the wicked questions we need to ask? So hold on to that idea. What are the questions that we need to ask? As a society, as a community, but also as individuals, okay? But what I want to do is I want to start with a question that I pose to my students all the time. Some of them are back there, and they're going to come up here to this board because you're going to answer that question. So come on up here. This is Mackenzie, and I think Jagisha has agreed to write on the board also. All right. So the question I ask is in contradistinction to the question, is it art? Okay? So the question, is it art, as I contend, is deeply rooted in a society that is pathologically concerned with commoditizing itself, okay? So is it art? That's a question that's in relation to commoditization. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yes, okay, good, okay. So the question, should I say it again? You got that? Okay. I won't then. The question I ask my students is not is it art or is it not art, but what is it doing as art? Okay, so that's a really important question, and it's fundamentally different than the other question. So the question is, what can art do? So what can art do? Mackenzie's been in this class before. So I'm asking that question. What can art do? I think we can come up with 25 answers to that question in less than 2 minutes. Ready? Yeah? Educate people. What else can art do?
Please the senses.
Please the senses. What else can art do?
Challenge.
Challenge. What else can art do? That's only 3. What?
Reframe.
Reframe. Art can reframe. What else can art do? Unify. What else can art do?
Antagonize the senses.
Antagonize the senses.
Intervene.
Intervene? Okay, intervene. Are you keeping up?
Yep.
That's not good if they can keep up.
Inspire.
What?
Inspire.
Inspire. Art can inspire. We probably have 7, right? What's up there?
Disturb.
Disturb. Art can disturb. Is that what you said? Yeah. What else? Reveal. What else?
Take your breath away.
Take your breath away. You're like a poet over there. I can see. What else can art do? Send a message. Make you think.
Confuse.
Confuse. Another way of saying make you think. What else can art do?
Heal.
Heal. Is that like 5? No. How many are up there? I can't see. How many do you see? 16? 15. Oh, we got 10 more to go. Yeah. Okay, so art can propagandize. Okay, so we could have a lot. We'd have a whole class on that one. What else can art do? Make beauty? Yeah. What else can art do? Entertain. Art can consume. Okay. Soothe. What else can art do? Decommodify. Awesome. Thank you for listening so well. What else can art do? Art can memorialize. Art can make you laugh. Okay, and we could go on and on. And this is a really important exercise for people who are thinking about working in the arts. Yes, do you have one? Oh, we have 4 more. If you think of another one, let us know. Oh, yes.
Break rules.
Art can break rules. Okay. Let's stop. Predict? Connect. Art can connect. That's going to come up in a little bit. Thank you for that one. Okay, good. Thank you. That's Mackenzie and Jagisha, and they'll introduce themselves later. Thank you. Okay, so we got through that. I'm going to add to this list, for the purposes of this conversation, there's a quote from the South African playwright Fugard, and in a very recent interview at the age of 86, he says, "I found myself believing, and it is an act of faith that has stayed with me to this day, that putting words on paper is a valid form of action. You can throw stones, Molotov cocktails, petrobombs as hard as you want at those armored cars. Words can do much, much more than that. Words can get inside those armored cars. Words can get into the heads of the people inside those armored cars." It's a really nice image. So that's what art can do. So we'll do a little shift. And I want to offer you some insights into how I think about what I do. So first of all, I work as a theater artist. And to understand that, you might have seen theater. I think about that in a very particular way, which is not a typical way. So I work in the medium of movement, and that's the primary medium. So the medium of movement is the medium that I work in, and that medium must have a secondary medium to be made manifest. Does that make sense? No. So what I'm saying is I work in the medium of movement. In order for that movement to be manifest, there needs to be something else. So there's a body moving now. So the movement is primary, the body is secondary, and so on with words, with music, with sound. Does that make sense? Objects. Yeah, right? That was movement, but you saw it as keys going onto a table. Okay, so that's how I think about what I do. In the last quote, he's really talking about words on a page. I see those words as words in the space, so I see the movement of those words. Does that make sense? So the work, so that's one idea. And then the work of theater, I think of as inherently dialogic. So it's always in conversation with its audience. I go like this, and you go like that. And we've been doing pretty good at this little game, okay? So, but we need to understand that theater is only theater in relation to an audience. The theater does not happen here, and it doesn't happen there. It happens in the space between the two. Does that make sense? So we make that together. That's the dialogic part of it, okay? And I could say more about theater, but I think that the most pertinent idea further to this conversation about art and social change is a formulation that I make, and it's it's a really simple formulation. It is not trivial, and it goes like this. It says that art is that which it is not, and offers the difference between the two. Got it? So art is that which it is not and offers the difference between the two. And think about that. We need to take a step back and go like art, and we think about it in all these ways, but the really primary thing that we're doing is we're thinking of artificial and artifice. So art is that which it is not. Okay, and it's the distance between the two of those things that we're doing. So it's that distance where all those other words come up, right? Am I making sense? Yeah, okay. So there's this comparison between the two, and that's where we laugh or we cry or we connect is another one. And it's this oscillation where we look at it and we know it's really true. So it's artificial and we know it's really true. How many times does that happen to you where you see something and you go, oh, that's so true. It's so not true. But it is really true. Does that make sense? Yeah? You with me? Okay. And finally, in this formulation of art is that which it is not, there's an observer, okay? So there's art and there is art which it is not, right? and there's an observer, and that observer is you. And that's a really important part of this idea, which is that you are watching. That observer is always watching. And so then you sit in the audience there, and you sit in the audience there, and you're not sitting in the audience from the same point of view. So there's a triangulation that's happening for you, there's a triangulation that's happening for you, and there's a triangulation that's happening between the two of you watching this. Does that make sense? That's how I think about what I do. I know it seems like really weird, but it's really basic. And it's taken a lot of thinking about that. Okay, so I'm going to offer you a very brief biography, and then we're going to look at some work. So I began the work that I do, my vocation, quite young. I was 14, and it was through a CETA program. How many are familiar with CETA? I know at least one person in this room is familiar with the CETA programs. Raise your hand, Mr. Glassman. CETA was the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act. It was an extension, a grandbaby of the Work Progress Administration. So there was a social service program. I was part of this program as a teenager. We toured, we created work, and then we toured that work in the Chicago Public Schools, or the Chicago Public Libraries, and I was the only white kid in that grouping of students. That's not a trivial thing in my mind. When I was 17, I'll go back. When I was 15, my father died, and he died on my birthday. And this is a story that I don't tell publicly, but I'm telling it now for a reason. I think a lot of people can relate to this, and my students deserve to hear some of this. So when my father died, I was very close to him, and he died. And I was 15 and went to the funeral. He wasn't living with us, so I came back the 900 miles, and I laid on the floor for 3 days. And I was doing a lot of thinking about things. I don't know what I was thinking about, but I was pretty sure that I wasn't going to get up off the floor till I was done. And when I finally got up, I had decided that that I was only going to live on my terms, that I only wanted to live if I could make things that were beautiful and connecting. So I did. So I'm pretty determined that that's what I'm doing. I know other people who have made similar decisions in their lives. So there's a deep ethics about that, and that deep ethics has to do with self-determination. Does that make sense? So when I do work in community or with people, particularly with students, that real sense of self-determination is part of what I'm bringing. Does that make sense? So I think that is the basis for doing any kind of community-based theater work, that we're in it together, that we are all self-determining, and I'm not going to take away your autonomy in order to create that work. Cool? Great. From there, I moved to Chicago. Well, I was in Vermont, and I did a very quick, I was 17, and that was my first professional work with the regular theater company. And then I moved to Chicago and worked in Uptown at the Jane Addams Hull House. How many are you familiar with Jane Addams? Yeah. How many are you familiar with Hull House? All right. So there's a trajectory that's pretty clear in my work that started very young, and to this day I do community-based theater work. Here I do Inner Voices Social Issues Theater. I've done stuff at the YMCA. This is the work that I continue. So then after that, I moved to Urbana. Many of you know me from here. My work that I did at that time was a lot of work around apartheid, was the time I came here, but also HIV/AIDS was a really prevalent social issue that was going on. And particularly in this community, I was coming from Chicago into this community, and there was a lot of work that had to be done here. And so I did a day of performance, 7 hours of performance that gathered all of the community agencies and performers together. And we just took the day to do that work. And that was the first time that the News Gazette, which barely still exists, printed the word gay in the newspaper. So that was, so that was like, what can art do? Art can print the word gay in the newspaper for the first time. So with that, I want to invite Jeff Glassman up. We're going to look at some of this work. So Jeff is going to perform a piece called Eulogy that I made. It's a 3-minute piece, and it's for a friend of mine that was my first professional partner. The piece is called Eulogy.
Involving more in loving memory of her.
I would ask you what you saw, what you hear, what came up for you, but you don't have to answer that out loud. But I just want you to think about that. Because we're a little bit short on time, I'm going to now shift to another piece I want to show you. So keep in mind the things we talked about. Art is that which it is not. Where are the radical questions being asked? What is the question in that piece that you just saw? So, so the next piece is called Catherine. I wrote this piece some years ago, and it's performed quite often. It was just performed with Inner Voices. I'm going to set up. I'll talk to you like this so that you can hear me. So this piece was performed recently
The baby!
The baby! The baby! She was just lying there, curled on the floor, crying out to him, pleading for help. And he helped her. He helped Catherine to her feet. He even carried Catherine to her bedroom. And he told
me that I needed to be more careful, especially now with the baby on the way.
She nodded.
I nodded in agreement. Just agree with him.
She told herself, closing her wet eyes, trembling into the quiet as she listened to his footsteps move away from her into the night.
Into the cold, empty night. Just let this night pass,
She told herself. And the nights passed, nights turning into days, days turning into weeks, most quiet. Catherine was careful.
So careful.
So very careful.
Wanting everything to be perfect.
Sometimes Catherine would sweep the floor like 3 times just before he came home for dinner.
Needing everything to be perfect.
And she wrote out detailed shopping lists and planned her afternoon itinerary. And she wrote that down too. Because if she didn't...
He needed to know where the money was being spent. Every receipt was saved.
And the weeks turned to months. And one night...
The baby was born.
And one night...
The nights were quiet.
And one night...
The nights were quiet, mostly.
And one night...
And one night he got angry.
Again?
He got angry
again
over the way I paid attention to everyone except for him.
Except for him, and he's yelling, and Catherine, she's...
Don't wake the baby.
Everyone except for him, and now he's smashing the photo of Catherine's family, and he's yelling, and she...
Don't wake the baby, don't wake the baby.
And he is throwing the broken frame and the glass.
And I touch my face. And I stand for a very long time.
Silently. Catherine, she stands shaking. She does not speak. He tells her she has her own family to take care of now. He puts his arm around her, he kisses her on the forehead, and she...
I promise him that we'll see less of my family, and
He touches her cheek, and she...
I do not move. To breathe might set him off again.
This, too, will pass. She tells herself. And the months turned to a year. Catherine was quieter now. She was a good mother. He was a good father. They were a beautiful young family. Mostly.
A first birthday.
He bought the presents.
All of the presents.
And her parents didn't come because
we had moved out of state for his job.
And Catherine, she made a beautiful cake. She decorated it with
chocolate frosting.
And
I can't remember.
And
I can't remember.
She can't remember because the only thing that she remembers of that first birthday was...
The baby is in the high chair.
And she?
I didn't do anything.
She...
I wasn't doing anything.
She...
I was taking a picture of the baby, him and the baby, and I'm laughing, and the baby's laughing, and he was laughing, and the baby is showing off his sippy cup.
But now juice is spilling from the sippy cup.
Spilling on him and the baby.
Spilling on him and the baby.
And the baby's laughing, and I'm laughing, and then
he said...
He's saying, do you think that's funny?
He said...
Letting the baby pour.
And he's moving towards Catherine.
And he's ripping the camera from my hands.
Saying, how dare you humiliate me.
He's saying, how dare you humiliate me.
And he's throwing the camera at...
Not the baby.
She strikes out hard.
Not the baby.
She strikes her hand, hoping that
he'll chase me
her, damn it.
away from the baby.
And she's running out the living room.
Out the front door.
Onto the sidewalk.
And he's not following.
And he's picking up the baby.
There is no sound.
And he's carrying the baby. Gently.
Cars parked in driveways,
He opens the front door,
comforting the baby in his arms.
and Catherine is
I am standing barefoot on the snow-covered sidewalk, disheveled.
shaking from,
Fear.
and he walks past Catherine calmly up the driveway to
The car.
the Plymouth satellite. It's kept immaculately clean.
He's
and,
putting the baby in the car.
and Catherine is standing barefoot, disheveled on the snow-covered walkway, crying out into the empty
He's
twilight.
putting the baby in the car.
She is bent over now. She
He's
is yelling.
putting the baby in the car.
Pulls carefully out of the driveway,
I am moving toward the car.
and he is pulling gently out of the drive. And he pauses, looks at Catherine.
I'm reaching for the door handle. I see his face.
And the tires squeal.
And
she is standing in the snow-carpeted driveway, alone.
barefoot.
Warm tears staining her face.
Bent.
She's watching them drop. They're melting tiny holes in the snow.
Eensy beensy spider went up the water spout.
She is praying for him to return.
Along came the rain and washed the spider out.
Out came the sun and dried up all the rain, and she took solace in knowing that he would return.
Eensy beensy spider went up the spout.
And the years passed. Another move, another promotion. He was a good provider. He was a good and loving father. Mostly.
A loving family, a beautiful new baby,
And the nights came
a
quicker.
Hoover starched shirts,
And the nights came quicker.
perfectly arranged cabinets,
A loving home, a beautiful family, but the nights came quicker.
curtains, clotheslines,
The nights came quicker.
wind, curtains, sunshine,
Almost no
clotheslines.
time in between.
Daddy's home.
She tells him to.
Put your toys away
She
quickly.
tells him to.
Be sure to keep your voice down at the table.
She tells him.
I love you.
He asks, why does Daddy hit?
He doesn't mean to.
What's that? He says,
Nothing.
what? But yesterday, last night, I woke up again and I heard.
Shh. Go quickly now.
And the late afternoon turns to early evening. They enjoyed a beautiful dinner and the evening turns to night. The children sleeping peacefully. And he,
Is sleeping
she checks again.
peacefully.
And she,
I'm crawling out from under the covers.
and she,
I'm crawling across the floor.
and she,
I'm reaching up for the doorknob.
because he shuts the bedroom door tightly before going to
I'm
bed.
reaching for the lock because
He locks the bedroom door tightly before going to bed.
and I am undoing the lock
And he stirs.
and I stop.
She continues. She continues. She opens the door.
And the hall light is streaming in.
Go faster.
I'm shutting the door.
Go faster,
I'm
Catherine.
picking up the baby.
Faster.
I'm waking little Robert.
Wake him faster.
I don't want him to make a sound.
Get out of there. Pick him up.
I can't.
Go.
We're going down the stairs, the three of us.
Hurry, hurry.
I need
They're running for the pantry.
beautifully arranged cabinets.
The money behind the cans.
3 years of crumpled bills and change scraped together and shoved into a saltine box.
And your purse, his coat pocket.
I can't carry the money and my purse and the baby and hold little Robert's hand.
Robert, the money.
I'm unlocking the back
Get
door.
out of there.
We're running down the back stairs.
Hurry.
Little Robert is sitting on the back seat with the saltine box.
Give him the baby.
His eyes are so clear.
This isn't the time.
I'm starting the car.
Get out of there.
The baby's crying.
Pull out of the
What
driveway.
if he's waiting in the front?
Just drive.
I'm on the street,
At the corner,
past the parkway.
little Robert shakes a saltine box for the baby.
I need air.
Fear whips in the open window.
My heart pounds back.
His voice rides in on the wind. How
I
dare!
roll up the window.
His voice grows louder, trapped in the car.
I open the window.
Fear whips in.
Hands tight and sweating. I am
Driving, I am
driving. She is.
driving.
And Catherine drives for 25 years.
And every once in a while,
She can still hear his voice whipping in on the wind.
sometimes, it's just a whisper.
Sometimes smashing against her like a broken family photo.
And I feel my heart pounding back.
And Catherine drives.
I drive past shelters not yet built,
And she drives.
past legislation not yet written,
And she drives.
past ears not yet ready to hear.
She drives for 25 years. And sometimes, as she turns a corner, she sees
A young mother standing on the snow carpet, alone, singing.
and is uncertain if it isn't her own reflection caught in the car window.
Thank you. So sometimes when we ask questions, we're not asking in language that we know, we're asking in other ways as well. And I think that's a really good example of where the question's being asked, in what medium. So I'm just going to show one more piece. Actually, I'm not going to show it. Ebony Bradley is going to come up and she's going to read a piece. This piece it's a short monologue and then we'll close for question and answers. But this is a short monologue that comes from a piece that's called Side Eye. And it was written by me and a student named Mary Renee Presley. Do you want this?
The expectation that I educate others around the issues of race or gender or faith or some other set of intersecting identities so that they can feel my pain is further than I want to go. I learned his story that I was taught in school and then some. I think what I'm really feeling is that if people really cared about these issues, they'll take a little time on their own to learn some things. Take on some of the responsibility. Responsibility. Isn't that a great word? Response. Ability. The ability to respond. Besides, I don't know that I have the answers that you need. A lot of people seem afraid of talking about the issues that come up around race or religion or class is somehow offensive. I find the silence more difficult. How can people not speak? What is the silence really doing? But it's weird, you know? The way that people who aren't Jewish or gay or Latinx or whatever hesitate slightly before using the term to someone they know who is. Like it's offensive in and of itself to be gay or black or Muslim or whatever. You know what I mean, right? The little flutter of a pause. What is that? Or the multitude of other little enunciated ways of perpetrating systematic problems. The sort of sleight of hand in our language that points to the recipient of the problem as if that's where the problem lies. You know what I mean, right? Like, they got beat up because they were queer, as if being queer caused it. Taking the responsibility right out the hand of the perpetrator and putting it into the hands of the person being targeted like magic. These little tricks are all over the place in the language, built into the way we speak. Maybe that's why people are so afraid to speak the language. Response, ability, the ability to respond. What is it that you cannot yet say? What is your response ability? Thank you.
Usually after a performance, I ask the people who perform to come back up. So I'm going to ask you guys to come back up. And we're just going to do the question and answer. And if you guys want to stay on stage, it might be really helpful. And Jeff, that includes you also. So this is where I say thank you. That's all I have to say. And you get to ask questions. Yes.
Well, thanks first of all. It's a very your powerful testimony. And also your wonderful students.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued by your notion of movement as center, as primary.
Yeah.
I study social movements. So I need to know if you could reflect a little bit more on the nature of that movement in order to, for now, why should we take movement seriously?
So why we should take movement seriously, I could give you a tricky little question, which is if we took movement seriously, we wouldn't have knots. So knots, yeah. So that's a that's a tricky way of saying that what we do is in time, and we have to remember that all of the time. So so if you're studying social movements, there's things that are happening in time. So I think that's all I can say about that right now, is that that mostly we forget that that's what we're in. We think of, and especially in this society where everything is, has the capacity to be commoditized, right? So we tend to think of things not as in time, but as objects. And if we can start to think of it in time, then we can have conversations that are difficult, and they have a particular dynamic and flow to them, and they're allowed to be difficult. The way we think of a difficult conversation is, oh, that's a hard conversation. So those are, I think it's really helpful to think about. Yeah, thank you. That was a good question. Okay. Should I call on you? Yeah.
I'm hoping I can phrase this well, but I've been thinking about Gertrude Stein throughout what you're doing, and one thing that I think about when I think about her work is that she's sort of saying that when people look at words, they're often looking through the words at what they mean.
Yeah.
Sort of like you might look through a window, and she's trying to bring you back to look at the window or at the words instead of into what the words mean.
Yeah.
With your performances, are you trying to bring people back to movement rather than what movement means? Does that make sense?
In a tricky way, yeah. I think what I'm trying to do is get people to see, and I think in that way, that's also what Gertrude Stein is trying to do too, is to see the thing that's there, not what we assume is there or that we get used to seeing. So yeah, I would say that. And I think the responsibility piece is part of that. Two people performing one character is a way of doing that. Is that helpful? Yeah, seeing the movement. Yeah. I thought, yeah.
Well, first of all, you pointed out early on the difference in, the real and the unreal, or you put it a little different. You reminded me of a quote, and probably know this quote better than I, but approximately it is, art is a lie that helps you to see the truth. I think that's from Picasso.
Maybe it is.
Anyway, I've had that up on my bulletin board for years and that kind of thing. So that's what you immediately kind of brought up in my mind. So that's what I was listening or watching with. And so then I'm thinking, well, but this is so vivid. All of them were so vivid, really, realistically vivid, but also evocative in a way. So it's not as simple as deception and insight or something. It's a whole system of awakening sensitivity to what's being communicated, I guess, and then just taking it in.
Yeah, this is John Jordan. He used to he used to be my boss once upon a time. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I think it's a little bit further than making it a lie. So the idea is that it is what it is not. So so how do we show that? Somebody's talked about reframing early on. Art can reframe, which is a way of doing that too. So I'm reframing and reframing and reframing. Other questions? Yeah.
I think I'm allowed to ask a second question.
Yes. You can.
As an educator, this campus is spending so much money on artificial intelligence.
Yes.
What do you make of that? Is that taking us further, or is it bringing us closer? I mean, it's not a day that the Daily Liner does another piece, or the campus is celebrating this virtual reality. Where are you guys as embodied artists?
He asked the question as, where are you guys not as artists, but where are you guys as embodied artists? And I think that's where we are in our bodies. Are you asking where the technology is?
Well, I mean, the other side of the industry, there's so much investment.
Yeah.
Spending so much on artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Right? Putting on goggles to see some other dimension. But
Right. So one of the things that we do a lot is we'll go into classroom situations, or we were just at a conference this morning, and we do role plays with people, and we know that if they're doing those on a computer, where they have an avatar, then they can sort of sit back, and they don't have the kind of adrenaline that happens when two people are actually engaged with one another. So I think that that's actually the difference, is that it is artificial intelligence, and we, I don't know, people are really important to us when we engage directly with them. They also know that children are more and more becoming less and less empathetic, so the capacity to muster that sense of urgency with another person is less and less. Does that make sense? Yeah.
do you see yourself as an antidote?
Do I see what?
Do you see yourself as an antidote?
I see us as I see us as virtual reality. I mean, so the whole thing is like, oh, what's virtual reality, and let's do virtual. But this is like really, really high tech virtual reality. That's how I think of it. So yeah. Are we good? Okay. Okay. Yay.